All right. Today is chapter 6 of the Old Testament in 7 sentences. Next week will be our last meeting. We will miss Hinton and Linnell. I'm not exactly sure how much they're going to miss us, given that they are going to be on the bypass there between Helen and Cleveland, enjoying some time away. So, and we wish you the very, very best as you go up there.
This is what the doctor ordered.
There you go.
Did the doctor okay it?
Um,
Did the doctor say
Yeah,
cool?
that's what she said. Go
Get
up,
out of
take it
here.
easy, don't
That's
do
right.
anything.
That's right. All right. Well, today we're looking at chapter 6. And chapter 6 is the gospel chapter. And it begins our 6th sentence. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the one who brings good news. And Dr. Wright begins this chapter putting us in the place of exiles, or even those left behind in Jerusalem following its destruction. Any city, really. But for 2 lifetimes, there's just been no news, certainly no good news. And then all of a sudden, you see coming toward you a long-distance runner, and you hope finally to hear the news. And so that gets us into the kind of the mindset of Isaiah 52:7. We're getting ready to hear these in the seasonal Handel, Handel's Messiah. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the one, and here the Hebrew word is singular, who brings good news. I want to stop the lesson right now because we are getting a call here at the church from a McKinley construction. Does that mean anything to either one of you?
No.
Okay, then we'll just carry on. Okay, I just want to be sure. All right. But Isaiah 52:7, continuing on at page 120. See, that's one of the great things about streaming these. You get these live things that happen in the midst of the, and I don't know why I'm making hand motions and everything, because for the grace and mercy, I don't turn the camera on, so that you can be spared. But you get that, so all is well, carry on. But as we continue on page 120, person's beautiful who proclaims peace, who brings good tidings, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. We have this, and he does make a change in verse 7 to singular to line up with his point in the Hebrew. It's plural there. So 6th chapter opens with this dramatic sentence. You know the history. Nebuchadnezzar has come in and destroyed the city. Yahweh has allowed him to, and the temple. And it has been 2 generations, 2 lifetimes. And there has been no word. And now, the exiles are coming back home. They're going to be allowed to come back. Now, you and I both know that many of them did not. Many of them decided to stay. And makes a bit of sense because they are told by God to build homes in Babylon, be good citizens, be for the welfare of the country, but some do, all right? But before we get to that, I did want to point out this phrase, brings good news. It's bottom of 120 over to 121. And here's your Greek word for the day. So if you're at a trivia contest and you want to know euangelizomai at the top of, it sounds like a pizza, doesn't it? But the word is euangelizomai, which is where we get the word evangelize. Greek didn't have a V. All right, it was euangelizomai. And this is the word we find frequently in the New Testament with its noun, euangelion. In Latin, it's evangelium. okay? So that's where we get to evangelize. It's from the Greek to the Latin, meaning to proclaim the gospel, the good news that God has acted in Jesus of Nazareth to bring about all the prophets promised. And that's exactly how Paul explains the Old Testament scriptures when he goes to Pisidian Antioch. He says, this is the good news we are bringing to you. We tell you the good news, what God promised our ancestors, that is, through the prophets, he has fulfilled for us, their children, by raising up Jesus. So in another place, Paul actually quotes our sixth sentence in Romans 10:15, referring to those who take the gospel to peoples who have not yet heard. Okay? So in this chapter, we're going to talk about, just as you've already read, we're going to talk about the anticipation of the gospel in the Old Testament prophets. And it's another reason why I think it's very important for us to not discard the Old Testament, to not have 2/3 of our Bible simply set aside, because it's all here. If we have eyes to see, ears to hear, hearts to understand. But there's bad news before there's good news. So we'll turn over now to 122. Anybody got anything as we refer to the exile in Babylon in this part? One of the things that I thought was good is the different responses of the kids, of the kids. Listen to me, always in my mind, of the people, and there are different responses. These responses are common today too. Some just turn their back on Yahweh. Obviously, it's not powerful. I mean, here we are. And then others do accept that Yahweh has brought judgment. But they have different ways of looking at it. Some protest that the punishment, even though it was deserved, was it not simply too vicious, right? How could God allow the Babylonians to inflict such cruelty, especially on women and children? You read the prophets. We just strolled through Ezekiel, and we'll get to him in a minute. But I mean, it's ugly. It's ugly. Yeah,
When they were taken from Jerusalem, weren't they considered slaves? But after they were there a while, it sounds like they stayed because they weren't slaves.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. They built homes. They built a life. And yeah, it just, when the time came for them to go, when Cyrus issued the edict, the next kingdom in line, they decided, you know what, we got a pretty decent home here, and we're okay. It wasn't a rejection necessarily of Yahweh. It was just, you know what, we're going to stay here. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and go ahead.
Or at least the way I understand it, Babylon, when they were taken to Babylon, they weren't treated as bad as the northern kingdom was when they were coming to
I
Assyria.
think that's true.
I think the king of Assyria tried to get them to do away with the Hebrew religion altogether.
Yeah, I believe so. I think he tried to stop it out. Yeah, best he could. They'd already done a pretty good job of that. The kings in the northern kingdom were bad. There were no good ones. There were a couple of good ones in the south, but in the north, it just were not good. And they had already let them, thanks to Jeroboam and then those that came after it. They'd already led them into Baal worship, Baal worship. They'd already led them into other pagan, whatever, Asherah, whatever else they needed to do. And most of that was out of his fear that they would return to the temple and that they would eventually say, you know what, we were wrong to part from Rehoboam and the house of David. And then he'd have no kingdom. So he did everything he could to keep them from doing that, so that future kings, and if you read through 1 Kings and 2 Kings, future kings are always, if they're bad in the north, it always said they persisted in the sins of Jeroboam. They began, so he became a bad word. Yeah, so yeah, they were already well on their way to pagan worship, but yeah, I think the treatment of the Assyrians was brutal on the northern kingdom. Because the northern kingdom, for the most part, resisted. The southern kingdom didn't resist all that much. Some of them were very much okay with it. They understood the prophets and said, we'll go. So yeah, just different empires treated their people differently. Yeah, so if they did take them over as slaves, they weren't really slaves for very long. And then they would have been in corporate. Now the leaders, yes, the leaders would have been kept in chains. Would have been
King being blinded and
yes,
Yeah.
Zedekiah, yeah.
after his sons are killed.
Watch your sons die, and then yeah, gouge out his eyes and
But
take him
then
to.
he was brought to the table later on, right?
One of his descendants was.
Oh,
yes.
his
One of his descendants was. That's that little grace note at the end. But God, but. So that it just shows the Israelites that exile, not the end of the story. Not the end. Good. So they react differently. We get, this is where the Psalm 137 that we talked about in another lesson. I think it was on Wednesday nights. Some cry out for vengeance on their enemies. I'm on page 122. Particularly Edom and Babylon. Others complain bitterly that if this is God's judgment, he's unfairly inflicting it on them when it is really all their parents' fault. Why are you blaming me? It's my mom and dad's fault. We're being made to suffer, right? So Ezekiel addresses this in chapters 18 and 33. Now, there's some truth here. God was patient for centuries with the sins of earlier generations, but that doesn't mean that the exiled generation is innocent. They're suffering just judgment on their own sin. They are hearing the consequences of their own, they are bearing, the consequences of their own guilt. Okay? But there are some that accept that it is indeed Yahweh and that they have indeed deserved it. They refuse to listen, and we see that over and over again, especially in Jeremiah. And now the axe has fallen. Such people are completely broken. These are the ones that are broken in spirit. For them, all of this means the covenant is shattered and God has cast them off. And they can see no hope. So how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the one who comes to bring good news. Ezekiel spelled this out in Ezekiel 37. They might as well be dead bones in a grave, as Ezekiel hears them say, right? But they're still crying out to God in their desperation, as you can read in Psalm 74. There will be words of hope, but first they need to understand clearly what has happened and why. And that's why the prophets are there. So anything in that section that we just covered? I love the excursus on Ezekiel. Most misunderstood, one of the most misunderstood, but I think powerful of the prophets. It's kind of weird in spots. And I like the word he used, pornographic, to describe some of the images. And they are. If you've read it, that's we won't talk about that. But yes, he's talking about the lusting and the whoring of the Israelites after other gods, and uses just graphic images to describe it. Just horrible. But here's the good news: God gives future hope. The judgment is logical, but it's also limited, right? Leviticus and Deuteronomy make it clear they've been warned, but beyond that lies the prospect of forgiveness and restoration. And I like this line here: the whole relationship between God and Israel. I'm on 123. I'm sorry. The whole relationship between God and Israel was founded on grace, and it will continue by grace. Okay?
Grace
go ahead.
Grace is such a magnificent thing.
Yes, it is. And it's so counterintuitive to us as humans.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
That, we talked a little bit last night about our pride.
Mm.
And I think one of the deterrents, at least I can say it has been true in my life, that one of the deterrents to giving grace to somebody can be pride.
Mhm.
Because, well, that's just not what we do.
Mhm.
That's not how this works. That's not, grace. We always use the big ones, but they're the easiest to recall and remember. But we think about when the Amish school shooting,
Mm.
there have been several more,
Goodness.
but that particular one, when the parents of the kids who were killed rallied around and supported the widow of the shooter and offered grace and forgiveness to, this person. Now, of course, he was dead, but to offer that and to surround that widow, that's grace. God's grace. Inexplicable,
Mhm.
amazing, right? John Newton said, amazing grace. So, and it's hard. Okay?
I like that sentence following.
Okay.
that. For that reason, first sentence in the next paragraph, for that reason, many of the prophets bring promises of future blessing even after the most fearsome preaching of judgment.
Yep. Judgment will not be the last word. And then he takes us on a journey through the prophets, starting with Jeremiah and his book of consolation, and the excursus with Ezekiel. We could read that, but yeah, Jeremiah 30:33. In the middle of all of that, in the middle of that big paragraph on page 125, we have Jeremiah promising that God will make a new covenant with his people. It will have many similarities to the one he made with them after the Exodus that they have so woefully broken. But it will involve a complete forgiveness of their sins. There's the new part. Okay. Jeremiah 32 records an incident in the life of Jeremiah. He buys a field. He doesn't have any descendants. Okay. He probably buys it with the last bit of money he had. But it's a sign of assurance that the people will return long after Jeremiah's own death. Then he goes on to promise a future restoration of Israel with the son of David ruling over them in righteousness. Okay? After that, we go to Ezekiel, right? The last 14 chapters of Ezekiel. Amazing chapters of future hope. And people say, what is heaven, if we want to call it heaven? That's not what Ezekiel calls it. What is the hope of Jews in exile when Jerusalem has been destroyed? What do they want to see? They want to see two things. They want to be back home, and they want to see a new temple, right? The temple is perfect in its dimensions. The temple is absolutely perfect. And if you notice the artistic way, we just finished this, Carol. Yeah, you loved it. Not so much. But the laying out of the land is it's just perfect. Everything is exact measurements, and everything is just, wow. Well, we know how it goes, right? But this is a picture of restoration, a picture of God's forgiveness, a picture of coming home from exile, the restoration of the worship of God, and a renewed temple. That's what they want. And a reconstitution of the whole people of God. I like how he says it, in a stylized allocation of the land. And it really is. And the presence of God in his city. Because one of the saddest parts, and I'm trying to remember if it is Ezekiel, is the departing of the glory of God from the existing temple. And he does it in stages. It comes out and sits here. And he comes out and sits here, and then he's gone. I mean, just trying to get the people to see that the glory of God has left the temple. So it's fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. So then we move on to Isaiah 40 to 55. And this is just, and we're going to come into contact with that throughout the Advent season. God's going to overthrow Babylon, of course, an empire's empire. And so Cyrus overthrows Babylon, the new and rising king of Persia, and then Cyrus will allow the Israelites to go back to their land. And this is where the gospel's sixth sentence comes from. And then he goes into a little bit of a discussion about the authorship of these chapters. The dominant mainline view is that the words of Isaiah 1 to 39, because there is a clear break at 39. At the very end of 39, the next word, you know what the next word is? The first word in chapter 40? Comfort. Comfort ye. Comfort. Comfort. It's been nothing but at the end of that first book. Some scholars break it up into 3 books. And I've talked about this a little bit before. Because it covers such a long span of time, and it does. Some scholars have believed that there was the original preaching of Isaiah, but then there were his disciples who carried on in his style. Some refer to it as second Isaiah, chapters 40 to 55, and then the chapters that describe the new creation are then attached to somebody else. I don't believe we need to go that route. It doesn't. I like what he says here. Whichever way you go, it's just for me, it's an interesting factoid about the book. It's all drawn from and has Isaianic maybe echoes. I mean, it really does. That was okay. That wasn't my best job on that, but it does. It carries forth Isaiah's main themes. Okay. I just say it's Isaiah and we move on, and that's because that's what it is in the Bible. So there you go. But yeah, deeply influenced by Isaiah. It's and I like what he says here. The very bottom sentence. When you get into discussions about authorship of biblical books, they start to grab the table underneath a little bit and start to, what do you mean it wasn't written by Paul or somebody like that? I like this sentence.
Yeah, I do too.
Whichever view is right, it is the content of these scriptures that matters more than the identity of who originally wrote them. I could not be in more agreement than that right there. It is what is on the page that matters. Yeah. All right. Now, look at this stuff. Look at page 127. This book is worth this page.
Yeah.
If you want a real spiritual tonic in that armchair with the strong coffee, I like that. Find some time to read right through Isaiah 40 to 55. I'd have Diet Coke. But here are some of the great themes you'll find. Look at this, y'all. A new future. It's not all bad news. The past is, this is a sentence for all of us who still cling to that treasure chest of trash known as our past. The past is behind me. The judgment's complete, and now God is on the move, or as C.S. Lewis says, Aslan is on the move. God is on the move to do something new. It'll be something greater than they've ever known. So get ready. 2, a new exodus. God is going to lead them out of captivity in Babylon, just as he led them out of slavery in Egypt. It won't be exactly the same, but it will be their coming out of slavery. These chapters contain rich imagery about a new journey through the wilderness and how God will provide for them there. Okay, so here's redemption language again. All right, redemption language. A new revelation of God. This new act of God will demonstrate that Yahweh alone is truly God. He's the creator of the universe, sovereign over history. He alone can predict events and interpret them afterwards through the words of his prophets. Gods of the nations, by contrast, are weak and powerless. Indeed, they're nothing at all. Nothing at all, right? New hope for the nations, all right? Remember the promise to Abraham. Don't ever forget that promise. All right? if these chapters bring an explosion of color to the promise of God to Abraham, the nations can now turn to God and find blessing and salvation. And then you get reference to a new figure who will embody Israel. In the midst of Israel's failure, God reveals a new and mysterious person who will embody their identity and fulfill the mission, the servant of the Lord. Okay? Or we call him the suffering servant because of what ends up happening to him. And of course, you have a little excursus here on page 128 about the servant of the Lord. And then comes what I truly believe is one of the most well-written and helps when we're reading the prophets. And that's the three horizons of prophecy. I think this helps. I've tried to articulate this, but I get frustrated at my own self because I don't feel like I do a good job on this. But the horizons are important when we're reading the prophets. And I think one of the ones that helps us is to understand that when a prophet spoke, it may have been in fulfillment of more than one thing. But let's start here. Obviously, when Isaiah says in what we call Isaiah 7, verse 22, when Isaiah says, "The young woman will be with child and shall bear a son, and you'll call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. I think he does a great job here with that. The Old Testament era, these prophecies, most of them have a fulfillment in the prophet's own time, or the wider Old Testament as a whole. Most of what they predict is going to happen within Old Testament Israel. But then if you go down to the bottom of the page there, sometimes we find an Old Testament prediction that is made and fulfilled at Horizon 1 can also carry forward and have even more significant fulfillment later. What I call the filling up of the prophecy, what he calls Horizon 2. And he uses Isaiah 7. Notice, this shall be a sign to you, okay? And I know Linus Van Pelt says it much better than I ever will. This shall be a sign to you, right? Since it is a sign, now this is Isaiah talking to King Ahaz here, all right? Since it's a sign, it has to mean something for Ahaz. It just does. I mean, just you kind of think about it. It's just conversation with Ahaz. We have to assume then that a child is indeed conceived and born soon afterwards, because the Hebrew word there is young woman. It is not until we get over to the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, where they use the word Parthenon, and Parthenon can also mean virgin. Alma simply means a young woman, okay, in the Hebrew. But Parthenon does include the word. And guess what Old Testament Matthew was reading when he was composing his gospel? The Greek. The Septuagint, all right? Reflecting on the stories that he has been told about Jesus, maybe even by Jesus' mama. Reflecting on those stories, he goes back into the Old Testament and sees, Isaiah 7, 22. So we have that. But that's Horizon 2. All right. And he says that here. Matthew finds an even greater level of fulfillment of that Emmanuel prophecy, because indeed God is with them and delivers them from their enemies, the Israelites. Okay? All right. We tend to read that and say, okay, so his name is going to be Emmanuel. Jesus was not, when they went to the temple in Luke to name the baby, they did not name him Emmanuel.
No.
They named him Yeshua, or Joshua, God saves. Yeshua, God saves. But the idea of God being with them, yes, that's there. And Jesus even says it at the end of Matthew. Remember his last words at the end of Matthew? And I always tell people it would have been absolutely ridiculous if he had ascended right after saying this. and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the ages. And then that would have been kind of weird, wouldn't it? They're about, wait a minute, he said he was gonna stay, you know. But the idea is, you link that up with the first of Matthew, where they're told, his name shall be Emmanuel, and then it bookends. It creates a nice bookend for the Gospel of Matthew. God is with us. God is with us. Right there. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Let's talk about this New Testament era, though. All right, so we've done a little bit of that work, but I like this. I call it filling up, but I like his sentence here in the middle of this paragraph, guys. It says, the one that begins, the prophets do not only speak about a coming person, but rather they describe things that can only be perfectly true through Jesus. All right. For example, when Jeremiah speaks about God making a new covenant, much of what he says is similar in principle to the Sinai covenant. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm back up, just talking about, what Jesus said, about being with them always.
Yeah.
Well, there was a period there that he wasn't, but the Holy Spirit came, so technically he is with us always
Well, of course.
in the Holy Spirit, so.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. From a linguistic point, it would have been weird for Matthew to write the ascension there. That's just a literary thing. It would have been, wait a minute, where'd he go? So, but you're right. You're absolutely right. That's good stuff. And then when Isaiah speaks about the servant of the Lord, there are several things said about the servant that are also said about Israel. They're chosen and loved by God. One way to interpret the servant of the Lord passages is that Israel is the servant of the Lord. But once again, this can only be truly filled up by Messiah, right? Israel was given as a light for the nations. They didn't really want that, as evidenced by the events. But when Isaiah speaks about how the servant will bear the sins of many and die vicariously for us, we can only see such words fully embodied in the Lord Jesus. I love that. So we need to be alert to a possible gospel horizon in the words of the prophets. Now, I love this. This is another one right here. You highlight this, make it in bigger font, and put it in your Sunday school classes. Please understand that this does not mean that we have to find Jesus in every verse of the prophets. And this is an Old Testament scholar saying this, or the Old Testament as a whole. Rather, it means we should be aware that these texts are all part of a great historical and scriptural journey that leads to Christ. Isn't that nice?
I like that.
I once had a discussion that got red in the face. I actually didn't in this discussion. I know y'all were surprised. I did not get red in the face about this because there was just somebody that was adamant. That's what I even got like that. And I was like, whoa, that the fourth person in the fiery furnace with Rack, Shack, and Benny had to be Jesus.
Oh my.
And all I said was, what does the text say? Just read the text. That's all I'm asking you to do, is just read the text. It doesn't say that. It just says one like a son of man, which means human being. Oh, well, then that just has to be Jesus. And I'm just sitting here going, what is important in that story is the faith of Rack, Shack, and Benny. It's like the fish in Jonah. What is important about the story is what those young men say to Nebuchadnezzar before he throws them into that furnace. Whether our God will deliver us or not, we don't know. But let me tell you something, brother. We're never going to bow down to that image. And so he gets the fire even hotter, and they throw him in there, and the guys that throw him in there are burned up, but then they throw him in there, and then Nebi says, how's it going? There's somebody in there with him. God's in there with him, protecting him through an intermediary. That I was just trying to, but I didn't win, and I don't think God won either. But I didn't convince, that it had to be Jesus. it doesn't have to be. We don't have to find Jesus in the Old Testament. Yeah.
Just like in the book of Genesis, they say Jesus was who was in the garden with him.
Right. And Paul even says that it's Jesus that led the Israelites out during the Exodus. He even says that. He's the rock, and so he even does that. But I think we have to dig deeper and understand what Paul is doing here. And it's a bit more than just trying to find him. I like that sentence. How about you, Carol?
Oh, yeah.
I knew you would. Okay. How about you, Donna? Yeah.
It's like you believe the Trinity.
Yeah, right.
I love it. And I just wanted to, I was reading a little bit about Isaiah, and
Yeah.
it's, he has been referred to as the Shakespeare of the Bible. Have you ever heard that?
Oh, yeah. He's a beautiful writer. Yeah. Some of the most beautiful passages in all the Bible.
And a
Sorry.
lot of hymns, as it says in this chapter.
Yeah, a lot of. Sorry, Solomon. Sorry, David. Isaiah, pretty impressive. It really was. All right. Thank you, Donna. All right. So let's get to the third horizon here. So we got the New Testament era, and that leaves one, the new creation. There are times when prophets speak of a future that is described in terms that go way beyond anything we have experienced in the past or the present. And we all know, for example, we know that the prophets speak about God judging Israel and also other foreign nations, but sometimes they describe God's judgment engulfing the whole earth and all nations in cataclysmic destruction of all that is wicked and evil. See Isaiah 24. Such a universal vision takes us to the ultimate horizon of the second coming of Christ and the final judgment. Okay? But when they speak about the world of the future, there's joy and there's excitement. That second paragraph. We find ourselves imagining a world in which everything is perfect. Nature is full of abundance, just like it was at the beginning. The earth itself rejoices in its creator. Human life is safe. It's fulfilling. It's free from violence, injustice, hunger, and danger. War and violence, thanks be to God, no more. People and animals live in harmony and peace. That's going to be something.
I know.
Instead of a deer being absolutely, wanting to run away from you, come up to you and say, hey, how's it going? Or with Jan, it'd be a horse, or 10.
So you'll like our cats
I will not. There are some things, I don't care what Isaiah says, there are some things that may not change. The question is will they like me? I don't bite them, they bite me. But anyway, they can sense my fear and disdain. There you go. That's what it is. People from all over the world and all nations reject their false gods and turn to the living God and worship him with joy and gifts. It's not fulfilled at Horizon 1. They do return to the land, but when they get there, it's awful. It's just a bunch of ruins. And it really takes a while for them to get going. Nehemiah chides them. Well, I like your houses, boys and girls, but what about the temple? And what about the city? You could have stayed in Babylon. What about the things of God? So what we have to be important, what we have to know is that some things are not going to fall under the first era, the Old Testament era, or the New Testament era. Some of these passages, they have to be of the new creation. Now, I like this chart on page 132, showing us the parallels between what Isaiah says in the end of Isaiah and Revelation 21 and 22. All right? And this is what we get in those last two chapters of Revelation. The whole scene in those chapters, very deliberately, echoes many of the themes and the prophets. And to try to read Revelation, it doesn't often quote the Old Testament, but it is full of allusions. I mean, just subtle, small, and some very large allusions to the Old Testament. And so he encourages you to read Isaiah 60 and Isaiah 65, and then immediately read Revelation 21 and 22. And you will see all of this exactly. The ultimate vision of the prophets will only be fulfilled when Christ returns and the earth is cleansed and renewed to be the dwelling place of God with us. He goes on to say that there are passages that include all three horizons. I think Isaiah 7:22 is one of them. That God with us, that end of that prophecy, yeah. Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. Yeah, absolutely. But I like what he says here again at the bottom of the page. Remember, the prophets are looking into a future that, as far as they can see, is all one single vision. They do not, or could not, perhaps, know that it will be centuries before Horizon 2 comes along, and unknown centuries further before Horizon 3 will come. It still lies ahead. We, with our perspective, can now see that their words have stretched out over a vast period of time. They saw things from the front and saw things near and far as if they were all part of one big single picture. And isn't that something?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we are running up against it here. He does give you an example of a passage that has good news for all three horizons there. Isaiah 52, 7-10. So I know you've read that. All right. God's plan for the nations is exacted here. And that carries through. He mentions Paul here talking to the church in Rome. Remember, Romans was a fundraising letter for missionary trips to Spain. What a fundraising letter that was. All right. They'd never met him. He was trying to help them to get to know him and to get to know his theology. He had obviously been told about some of the problems going on there in the church at Rome. But he is ultimately writing to convince them to partner with him as he took his missionary work into Spain. He tells, "For I tell you that Christ has become a servant of the Jews on behalf of God's truth, so that the promises made to the patriarchs might be confirmed, and moreover," here it is, "that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy." And then he immediately supports that with 4 quotations from the Old Testament. That is where the story has to go, to the nations. And Paul's going to take it. The apostolic mission has its roots in the Old Testament. Now, obviously, we don't know what other passages he used. We just know what is in our Bibles, okay? But missionary commitment, he's taking the good news to the Gentiles and others as well. And then he gives you a few he lists a few, okay? All right. Now, finally, this is a long chapter, y'all. It's really just a review of the post-exilic prophets. So I just want to ask if there's anything in particular as they come back to the mess. Was there anything in these final pages that caught your anything in particular?
And there's Zechariah.
Yeah, Zechariah.
Zechariah portrays God sending his true king to Zion, but he will come riding on a donkey. No doubt Jesus had the prophecy of Zechariah in mind when he rode into Jerusalem.
She's on 136, by the way.
His death.
Okay. Yeah, no doubt Jesus was thinking about Zechariah. Absolutely. Right, and then Malachi. Well, Malachi's got a word, doesn't he? Malachi, angry. God is angry. He's angry with the people. They've come back and there's corruption. See, my goodness gracious. They've come back, they've rebuilt the temple somewhat, And there's corruption in the priesthood. Yeah, go ahead.
It also says that the people have gotten lazy in their service too. They seem to feel like God does not care enough to help them very much, so why should they bother sacrificing the best of what they have to Him?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Again, look all around. It's still in rubble. I mean, this is not the Jerusalem that the photo albums we've seen, this is not the Jerusalem that but they just kind of got lazy. They just kind of said, well, you know what? This is what it is. And Malachi excoriates them and says, look, you need to get ready because God's going to send Elijah back. And that name just would have invoked all kinds of images in the hearts of the Israelites. And then, of course, we know that it's John the Baptist who would come later. And we have Ezra and Nehemiah. I do like that he points out here, that he talks about the divorcing of the foreign wives, and how it's always important, I think, to remember that God did not ask them to do that. But it is the dedication to purity, to purifying the people before God, to get them to be serious again about their worship. That's what is the kind of the point there, is that we need to be, it's probably not the right or the only thing to do in that situation, because I'm just thinking about all these women and these children who are basically just told, well, bye. I mean, literally. I mean, well, bye. That's not a very academic way of putting it, but they're told bye. But it does indicate how seriously that Nehemiah wants to preserve the purity of Israel's faith. Okay? It does speak to that. But finally, we wait for God, right? Because we know what happens. Oh, the Persian Empire, it's overturned by Alexander the Great. Judah becomes part of the subsequent Greek empires to follow, and then the Roman Empire. So, one empire right after the other, conquering each other. But there are I want us to remember two features of the intertestamental period that stand out. People of Judah, beginning with Ezra, become ever more committed to the book of the law. They become a community founded and grounded in the scriptures. That's going to pay off for them later when the temple is destroyed, and they really become a people of the book and not of the temple, because it's gone. All right, so they become people of the book. They become a community founded and grounded in the scriptures, and their life revolved increasingly around the demands and hopes of the law and the prophets. They had scribes, they had rabbis, and then later a whole community of people who said, we're going to live in perfect obedience to the whole law of God, and they became known as the Pharisees. And that is not a slang word, it's not a negative word. They were just men who were absolutely committed to obeying the Torah. I mean, and what's bad about that? Well, we'll see. We'll see. The motives behind the movements, all of them were positive, okay? If God punished Israel for disobedience, right? Then if Israel is ever to find favor with God again and avoid a repetition of such judgment, it must strive to ensure that everybody lives according to the law. But as often happens, we get a religious system that easily becomes overburdened with additional rules and protections, and Jesus challenged it every step of the way, and rightly so. Okay. And then the other feature was an intensifying longing for God. Messiah fever is what I call it. It really did get high in the intertestamental period. Persecution was increasing, wickedness and oppression of the Greeks and then the Romans. It went from bad to worse. It seemed that their only hope was for God to act directly and decisively to bring in his own kingdom. It felt like the exile had never really ended, even though they were back, but they're not free. God must come, right? God must send the one he promised, establish his kingdom. These were the hopes that's why you have all these Messiah claimants during the time of Jesus and right before him and even after. The fever was there. They wanted freedom, right? So that's why when Jesus starts preaching in Mark's gospel, he says the time has come. The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news. So here we are.
Pastor James,
Yes, Donna.
I wanted to, back to the purification of the, does it, I mean, still today, I found out I have a measurable percentage of Jewish in my DNA, but it comes from my father's side of the family. And so they don't recognize, that you're part of them
Right.
unless it comes from your mother's side, because I guess, I mean, you always know who a mother is. They had the baby, but is it because they didn't know perhaps who the father was? Or, I mean, does that tie into this whole, we have to have, purity in the race? Or, I mean, how does that
Yeah,
work?
I think so. Yeah, there was no way to ensure paternity. I mean, back then. I mean, you,
Yeah.
you know, the kid might or might not look like his father, and I think as far as that, yeah, I think as far as ethnic Jews and and this is going to be extreme Orthodox Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think but that's not going to be the majority of Jews. Uh, the call that's like kind of like Ezra and Nehemiah and all that. It's just
Uh-huh.
now, again, there's going to be a fringe. There's always a fringe, but Judaism, as it has grown and progressed, has they don't have denominations like we do, but they have different groups
Mm-hmm.
that. So it's just that's a great question, and but yes, to be ethnically Jewish is to have a mother who was definitely Jewish. Paul,
And just
um,
for information, my
yeah.
heritage is Ashkenazi Jew
Oh
from
wow,
Eastern Europe. Yeah.
wow, Ashkenazi.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. I think I'm just Cherokee, French. You know,
Oh, listen, I'm a Duke's mixture myself, but I just think it's so interesting that,
yeah,
you can understand kind of your heritage in
yeah.
different
And this is
ways.
a commercial for Ancestry.com, folks. All right, there you go. But though I appreciate you sharing that, Donna. And yeah, so okay. So the last sentence. Enjoy your time. The Lord is my shepherd. And we're going to do some work with the Psalms and the wisdom next week, and then we'll close out this book. I want to say again, thank you to those that will stream this. Appreciate you very much. If you have any questions, please be sure to hit me up with those, and I'll try to answer them. And if I don't, I'll send you to Donna, and she'll try to answer them.
I'll
She's
look
about,
it up.
yeah, she'll look it up. Yeah, Google it. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, thank you again, everyone, for being here. God bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend.